Now, one of the things that's been talked about since the most recent budget is that we are now back in having the discourse around benefit scroungers, which I'm obviously sick of. I hate this discourse. We had far too much of this during the late years of the Labour administration. We had far too much of this during the coalition government. Which is why we had things like Benefit Street, for example. It's only ever used really as a way of dividing the lower classes in this country, trying to get people to fight against people who have nothing rather than against billionaire oligarchs who control the vast majority of the economic system. This has gone back into focus because the Conservatives are they're removing the disability assessment thing, so more disabled people can be forced back into work most likely because there's always going to come down on the worst side of this thing if it's a Conservative government, considering that in the 2010s there was a UN probe for the Conservative government violating the human rights of the disabled. So I wouldn't put it past them doing that again with what the policy they've got planned moving forward. The other thing that's happening is because one of the pledges that Keir Starmer stood on to become leader of the Labour Party was ending universal credit. Now, Jonathan Ashworth a few weeks ago was on Andrew Neil's programme and said that they are definitely not abolishing universal credit, and all they're going to do is slightly overhaul it. And to fact, to the point at which Jonathan Ashworth was on the news the other day saying that the benefit system needs reforming because it incentivises people not to get into work, which is Conservative messaging if ever there was one, which, again, very extremely tilting, not a fan whatsoever. The reason why I was reminded of this is this TikTok, right? You'll love it when I talk about TikTok on this program. This TikTok came up on my feed. Let's watch and let's have a think about the kind of things that it says.
The government wants the jobless to learn new skills or face benefit cuts. Those who've been out of work for 3 months and refuse to attend a 2-week intensive programme aimed at preparing them for work risk losing their universal credit payments. The programme, which is being piloted in 4 areas, will require daily face-to-face appointments at job centres.
I think it's having to spend loads of government money on having people do face-to-face interviews to learn new skills every single day to lose their benefits is more expensive than just paying them the benefits. In fact, with disabled people, it costs way more to judge whether or not whether they are eligible for PIP assessments, for example. It costs way more than the administrative cost alone than it would cost to just give people the disabled people benefits in the first place, right? There's not a case of cost-benefit analysis that's going on here.
Repeat offenders could lose their entire standard allowance for up to 3 months. The goal is to boost economic growth by improving prospects for job seekers and getting more people into the jobs market. Guess whether you support this will depend on whether you are an existing put-upon taxpayer or a work-shy, feckless fop.
Now that is the thing that is important. That's the important distinction that they're making here. Incredibly frustrating, right? So this Graham David person, he is the enemy, of course. I've talked about him on stream before. This guy's a TikTok landlord, like the lowest of the fucking low, who does this thing all the time, talk about how much he hates the left, and I can't believe all these entitled kids want to have affordable housing. Woe is me, I'm a put-upon landlord in this economy that's specifically built for my own material interests, right? And what he's saying here is, one of the parts he's saying is correct, and one of the reasons why the Conservatives are claiming that they're doing it is to boost economic growth. One of the problems we have in this country is with the labour force participation rate. Lots of people are out of work. They want to stop people retiring early, hence the pension allowance being increased, for example, for millionaires, basically, to keep them in work rather than retiring early. We had discussions around cutting people's benefits to be able to get them back into work. The issue is, right, because our labour force participation rate is way behind, for example, a country like Denmark's, where we're 10% labour force participation behind where the Danish economy is. And the Danish economy has far more generous welfare payments. Let's be real, it's not benefits. There's no benefit to being on universal credit. It's a welfare payment because it's something to give you the basic essentials to be able to live. It doesn't even do that a lot of the time, but that's the main utility of the policy platform. We have an incredibly draconian welfare system, far more so than Denmark is. So that can't be a justification to try and get people to increase out of benefits into work to increase our labour force participation rate, when really the actual issue is too many people are out of work on long term because of long-term sickness as a result of the fact that they've not put enough money into the NHS. It's funny how there's just all of the austerity problems magnify over time, over huge sections of the economy. If you don't have a properly functioning state apparatus to give the basic essentials done, you do not have a functioning economy because people can't function within it, because getting people's basic needs sorted makes them more economically mobile, makes them more economically productive, for example. And loads of people out of work because they're on long-term sickness, because they've been failed by a catastrophically underfunded NHS, is going to lead to lower labour force participation rates. Now, the other thing as well is that he makes this distinction, which is the very easy kind of divide and conquer thing that conservatives will do. Not the Conservative Party in general, but conservative people will do. Because obviously John Ashworth has been saying this, which is a conservative line on what would constitute the way in which we should view how benefits work, for example. Saying that the issue of benefits is fundamentally something that is between workers who pay tax and benefit scroungers who take tax away. Obviously, benefit scroungers still pay tax and VAT and things like that, but way less tax than would be paid by someone who works. Now, there's two things to say about this. Actually, probably three things I could probably say about this. First of all, that's not how taxation works. Taxation is a way, first of all, of controlling the money supply, second of all, of driving demand for currency, and third of all, a way of disincentivizing behavior that you don't like, that the government doesn't want to happen, right? By making it more expensive and reducing the demand for it by increasing the price through taxation. It's not for funding public services. That always comes out of the central bank. Taxation is used as a way to control the money supply, having been injected into the economy through government expenditure. There is not a household budget. There's not a pot of money that the government can spend out of your tax money. Your tax money is not going to fund anybody else. That's a lie. That's never been the case. You've been sold a lie specifically to drive this wedge between people who work and people who are on welfare payments, for example. The second thing, of course, is there's one other reason. Right? There is one other reason, specifically why the Conservatives are pushing this line. And it's because they want to cool the labour market. Unemployment is extremely low in this country. Unemployment is it's the lowest it's been since the 70s. So what happens when unemployment is low? The competition for jobs is much lower, right? The competition for labour is much higher. And because competition for labour is higher, workers have more bargaining power within the labour market to push their own wages up. Because the number of consumers stayed the same, because the people who are on welfare payments, they still buy products. They're still people who are being consumers within the economy, spending their money on products that then go back into paying the wages of people who do pay taxes and do work. But they're not, in the labour market, competing with you for your job. So that means you get higher wages. The more people are on benefits, right? The higher your wages can be. You get to bargain for higher wages at the time. It strengthens your power within the labour market. The reason why Tories want to get people off of benefits and into the work, or theoretically back into work, for example, is because they want to reduce the bargaining power of workers. You should love benefit scroungers. They increase your buyback. They increase your wages, for example. And even if you do believe in the myth that there's this kind of mythical household budget pot where tax money goes into and then goes out of for public spending, even if you believe this nonsense, for example, the people who are paying in the money to pay these benefit scroungers are rich people. They're people much richer than you. People who contribute even less to the economy than people who actually go out and spend that money. People who make money off of owning stuff. Like, unironically, landlords like Mr. Graham David here, for example. I don't know whether he makes money off private rents or from social rents or whatever, or whether his tenants are paying housing benefit, because that is literally the government paying your own rental payments because your rental payments are so high that they're unaffordable for people to even live in. So the government has to top that up in the first place. But you also don't do any work. You don't contribute to society by just owning stuff and renting it out. You're not a productive member of society. You're the leech here, right? You're a work-shy fop, aren't you? As a landlord, just taking rental money for no reason, right? Slum landlords tend to love DSA because it's a regular payment. Well, 100% they do. Exactly. They're happy taking money from the state. They really are happy about taking money from the state. But it's fundamentally a way of, A, weakening the bargaining power of workers within the labour market, and fundamentally a way of being able to divide people who are on the bottom rung of the ladder against people at the top, against their own material interests. It's within your material interests to have more buyer power within the labour market. It's why they are talking about making the job seekers and disabled work in hospitality in particular, because that entire industry is just facing mass abandonment if people have other choices. Well, 100%, exactly. Well, that's exactly what they're trying to do. That's what workfare was for. Workfare was specifically there when they had to, if you wanted to get your benefits, you had to work. You had to go to work for your benefits at drastically reduced cost to what you would be if you're actually within the labour market. Well, that's what America does with prison labour. Prison labour isn't there because they want to teach a moral lesson to prisoners. That's what they tell you they're trying to do. They're trying to undermine workers in the labour market by undercutting them with cheap prison labour. That's the thing, right? So fundamentally, taxation is the taxes workers are paying aren't going to people on benefits. That's not how taxes work. People on benefits are trying to be forced out to trying to undermine your bargaining position within the labour market. And it's fundamentally a political project to try and make the crabs in the bucket fight against each other rather than actually tackling the real establishment, the real people with all the money in our society who are the ones driving down wages, for example. Like, there are definitely better ways of getting people out of long-term unemployment, for example. One of those ways is having a labour market that is actually incentivizing people to go and work in it. Why would anybody want to go and get a regular old fucking job at this point, entering labour market from being on welfare payments when the job's pay is shit? There's no future vocation coming out. There's no future career prospects. It's all commercialized and casualized gig work where there's no holiday pay, no sick pay, no benefits, no nothing, no maternity pay. Why would you want to leave the safe nature of universal credit, obviously not safe in terms of the amount of money that you get, but at least it's guaranteed income, to then have to rely on shitty gig economy work where you may not even have enough money to pay the bills at the end of it? And the worst part is that we spend loads of money on universal credit, not just on people who are out of work completely, but people who are in work who don't get paid enough. And they don't get paid enough because there's not enough bargaining power in the labour market, because it's been destroyed by a lack of union density and a continual focus on wanting to break the back of the labour movement by undermining their bargaining potential. And at the moment, we have an unprecedented amount of bargaining power for workers to be able to negotiate for higher wages within the labour market. And the Conservatives can't have that because that would impact the bottom line of their donors. So they have to find any way of getting people specifically to hate on people who aren't the sole arbiters of how much money they get paid. Right? Your boss pays more taxes than you. They steal more of your money in surplus value than any amount of taxation that could theoretically go to people who are on benefits, for example. Get a grip, get some perspective. Sure, maybe more people being in the workforce would increase economic growth. I think that would be a good thing. But why don't we, instead of breaking the backs of the labour movement by trying to undermine their bargaining power, we instead incentivize companies to offer good wages, to sacrifice profits for productive workers to help the economy? Or, for example, nationalize a bunch of these things. For example, have federal job guarantee instead of relying on unemployment as a method of inflation control. And then by using a federal job guarantee, you can then push wages up for everybody else, because then suddenly employers are competing with the government to be able to offer people contracted work. And then everyone's wages will increase and companies will be forced to take a cut of their profits to compete with the government who's interfering with the market. But of course that won't happen for neoliberals because they believe that the market is supreme. And so instead of actually making things better for working people in this country, people who do the work, who produce the wealth of our civilization, they will make them be angry with people who are even worse off than they are to protect the profits of the people who donate to them. And that's the whole political project going here. Exactly, profits are indeed stolen wages. The whole get into work and we'll mess up your payments up is another disincentive towards people getting back into work, as you'll possibly lose out on some of the steady stream of benefits. 100%, exactly. That's why I would happily support things like universal basic income, universal basic services, to make sure that there is this basic standard of living that everybody has access to, and therefore it means that companies have to be more incentives. You have to give you more incentives to go and work for them at the end of the day. Got hold of the PIP interviewers training manual. The purpose was to confuse claimants to contradict themselves by exploiting inconsistencies in their evidence. One participant had the acronym of DORDA. Well, that's the thing. That's what the ATOS miracles stuff shit was all about. If you First of all, if you created this bullshit narrative that there are people faking being disabled, you could use that to try and win the next election off the back of the Strivers versus Skivers narrative. And the second of all, what was really bad about it was that in the Labour years, right, for all of the faults of New Labour, one thing they did do well was in the job centre, people who worked in the job centres, they saw their role as being fundamentally a good one, right? People who couldn't find work, get them back into work so they have something fulfilling to do with their lives. Not that I think that work is necessarily fulfilling, but lots of people saw it that way. And the people who worked in the job centre did see it that way too, to help people get back into work when they're down on their luck, they don't know what they're going to do, and they want to have a job, for example. And as soon as the Conservative government came in, that all changed. Instead of being a positive movement to encourage people, it became a draconian movement to sanction people. And suddenly they were being forced by things like the manuals you've seen there, Scribby, to try and find reason to sanction people for a political project that led to, as we've seen from the evidence, austerity-led, mass death on a huge scale that, quite frankly, nobody talks about and everyone should be talking about every single day. And things we know as well, that the government has all of the money they could theoretically spend to keep people have a basic standard of living across the board. But instead what they're doing is giving out billions of pounds to the rich in quantitative easing, giving out billions of pounds of additional bond payments, for example, to subsidise the profits of energy companies while not doing a proper windfall tax because they've got loopholes so they can avoid paying the tax in the first place. And also the studies show that sanctions actually decrease the likelihood of getting people back into work. Because not only are there, very snide, electorally focused Conservatives who use these as culture war talking points to try and get people to fight amongst each other, but there are also ideological Conservatives who don't care about the utility of anything. They don't care about whether sanctions get people back into work or not. They just can't seem to be permissive of people who don't follow the rules to the letter that they expect them to, right? They want to punish people, and they don't care whether or not it actually does the good things, for example. It's very frustrating how they don't have any goals-oriented thinking. They have these political prescriptions based upon what they cannot be seen to be permissive of, and being seen to be permissive of people on benefits, for example, is much worse to them than the actual general well-being of the whole population. Exactly. The cruelty is always the point, and it always has been the point. If there were better universal services, then reducing benefits might be permissible, but when it's already barely enough for them to live on, it's a moral stick to use. It's absolutely, 100% agree. 100% agree. If there was enough basic services around so that people's general needs were covered, you can absolutely go ahead and do that kind of stuff, because you wouldn't be deliberately immiserating people and ending up in the situation of David Clapson, who died with an empty stomach and his blood sugar levels at critical levels because he couldn't afford the money on his meter to be able to put it into his fridge to keep his insulin cold. And that is what happens when you sanction people on benefits. People die, right? But it's far more important to Conservatives to not seem to be permissive of people on welfare than the lives of the vulnerable people who die because of the draconian shit that they pull. They seem to only do nothing but react in response to things. I wonder if there's a word for the people like that. I wonder. And even then, under the current system that we have, if unemployment gets critically low, it leads to an inflationary spiral. What do you think the NAIRU is? And the vast majority of our benefit payments are paid out to pensioners. Why is it that disabled people are scroungers who are faking it and taking state benefits, for example, but we're very happy to continually pay retirees triple-locked pensions over and over and over? Right? I think the triple-locked pension is good. I think old people should have dignity in their retirement. But that's also part of the benefits bill. That's part of the welfare bill. Why does that not reach the same IRSU? They might be very capable of working, right? They don't have to move around to work. They could work in a call centre if they wanted. Why is getting older people back into the workforce completely unacceptable? I agree that it is. It should be unacceptable. Why is that unacceptable? But forcing disabled people back into work is fundamentally acceptable, right? And again, because older people are the voters that matter, and disabled people are an easy scapegoat because they can't defend themselves. It's sickening. It really is sickening. But, as I said before, if you're a worker and you want to have better labour power, better bargaining power in your workplace, you should love benefit scroungers. They should be your best buddies by not competing with you in the labour market. Simple as that.